I'll never forget the way the sunlight hit the rusted, corrugated metal door of storage unit pound B47 that morning. It was one of those perfect days for an auction, blue skies, a light breeze, and the smell of coffee drifting from the food truck parked by the gate. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My friend Jess, the real storage auction fanatic, had begged me to come along for moral support. Jess has this knack for spotting treasure, where most people just see trash. She's quick, sharp, and not afraid to outbid anyone. The problem is she also gets carried away. So, when the auctioneer rolled up the door on B47 and a waft of stale air, mixed with the faint scent of oil hit us, I knew she was already hooked. From where we stood, the view into the unit was mostly blocked. All we could see was a large green tarp stretched over something big, with stacks of old wooden crates piled haphazardly around it. A cracked metal toolbox sat near the front, its hinges orange with rust. "Feels military," Jess whispered, squinting into the shadows. The auctioneer didn't waste time. "All right, folks. Bidding starts at $300. A few hands shot up. Jess was one of them. $350, $400, $5. I could feel her pulse quickening beside me. "It's worth it," she murmured. By the time the bids climbed to $1,000, most people had backed out. The crowd murmured. It was too much for a mystery unit. But Jess stood her ground. "1,400, she called, her voice steady but loud enough to silence the chatter. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. "Any more?" "Going once, going twice." "Sold to bidder 27. The moment we paid and got the keys, Jess practically sprinted to the unit. She gripped the lock with both hands, twisted it free, and slid the heavy door up. The sunlight poured in, and revealed the shape beneath the tarp. We exchanged a glance, our excitement bubbling over. Jess grabbed the edge of the tarp and yanked. The dust cloud that burst out made us cough, but as it cleared, there it was, an olive green, World War II-era military jeep. The paint was faded, the tires flat, but the lines the unmistakable rugged frame. It looked like something straight out of an old war photo. On the hood, barely visible under grime, was a faded white star. "Oh my God," Jess breathed. "It's a Willys MB, maybe even an original from the 1940s. We circled it like predators stalking prey." The driver's seat was cracked and brittle, the steering wheel worn smooth by decades of use. A canvas top, folded and tied, sat in the back. The gear shift was stiff, but the dash still had its original gauges, speedometer, fuel, oil pressure. But that wasn't the only thing in the unit. Behind the Jeep, stacked in neat rows, were 6 olive drab wooden crates marked with stenciled letters, "Property of U.S. Army." The paint was chipped, but the markings were clear. Jess pried one open with a crowbar. Inside, wrapped in oily paper, were spare Jeep parts, spark plugs, carburetor components, even what looked like an intact transmission. Another crate held rusted ammo boxes, empty but still bearing their original lot numbers. Then we found the folder. It was tucked inside a metal ammo box at the very back of the unit. The folder was thick, tied with string, and stamped in big red letters, "Classified." Jess and I looked at each other, hearts pounding. We untied it. Inside were faded photographs, black and white shots of soldiers, posing with the same kind of Jeep, some in dusty desert landscapes, others in dense jungle. But a few pictures stood out. They showed the Jeep in strange, unmarked facilities, surrounded by equipment I couldn't identify. In one shot, a soldier stood next to the Jeep with what looked like a prototype weapon mounted on the back. "These aren't just historical photos," Jess said. "This thing might have been part of some secret project." At the bottom of the folder was a small logbook. Its entries were handwritten, dates spanning from 1943 to 1945. Some pages were routine, maintenance notes, mileage. Others were cryptic. Mentions of Project Iron Torch, restricted testing grounds, and special transport protocols. "This isn't just any Jeep," I murmured. "It's got a story." As the day went on, we documented everything: photos, serial numbers, crate markings. Jess called a military historian she knew, a guy named Carl who'd helped her identify old war memorabilia in the past. When Carl arrived and saw the Jeep, his jaw dropped. "Where the hell did you find this?" he asked. "Storage auction," Jess replied casually, though I could hear the pride in her voice. Carl ran his hand along the hood. "If this is what I think it is, you've got something special." These Jeeps were built for a specific reconnaissance unit, small, fast, able to carry experimental gear. Most of them never made it back from the war. The few that did were either scrapped or locked away in museums. This one, he paused, glancing at the classified folder. This one was never supposed to be found. The words hung in the air. It was getting late, but Jess refused to leave the unit unattended. We loaded the crates and documents into her truck for safekeeping, then arranged for a flatbed to tow the Jeep. That night, As we sat in her garage with the Jeep parked under a dim light, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a lucky auction win, because sometimes the things you find in forgotten places weren't meant to be found at all. The next morning, Jess woke me with a call before sunrise. "You're coming over now," I groaned. "Jess, it's 6:30. You're gonna want to see this. Carl stayed late, and let's just say we've got something wild." When I got to her garage, the Jeep was partially dismantled. Carl was crouched near the front bumper, a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other. He looked up with a grin that made me uneasy. "There's a compartment in the chassis," he said, "completely sealed. I only found it because the measurements didn't match the blueprints for a standard Willys MB." Jess handed me a small metal plate, freshly unscrewed. Behind it, tucked inside a cavity no bigger than a showbox, was a tightly wrapped oilskin bundle. We unrolled it carefully. Inside was a set of small metal cylinders, each etched with numbers and strange symbols. They looked almost like high-caliber rounds, but heavier, denser. Alongside them was a folded map, its paper brittle and yellowed, with red lines drawn across the Pacific. "Coordinates?" I asked. "Not just coordinates," Carl replied. "These are classified test sites. And this," he picked up one of the cylinders. "This isn't ammo for a regular gun. Could be a prototype shell, maybe chemical, maybe something else." Jess' eyes lit up. "This thing could be worth way more than we thought." That's when we heard the knock at the garage door. Jess frowned. "It's 7 in the morning. Ooh." Two men stood outside, both in dark suits. They weren't smiling. One flashed a badge, too fast for me to catch the details. "We're here about a military vehicle, recovered from a storage facility yesterday," the taller one said. "May we come in?" Jess hesitated, but before she could answer, Carl stepped forward. "Do you have a warrant?" The men exchanged a look. "We'd prefer to keep this informal." "Then no," Carl said flatly. They left without another word, but the message was clear. They knew exactly what we had. After that, things got tense. Jess insisted we move the Jeep to a more secure location, her uncle's barn to towns over. We loaded everything onto the flatbed again, covering it with a tarp, and drove out under the cover of dusk. At the barn, we had more space to work. Carl dove into research, cross-referencing the serial numbers from the Jeep's frame with old military procurement records. Took hours, but eventually, he found a match. The Jeep had been assigned to a covert unit, called the 103rd Recon Experimental Division, a ghost division that operated in the South Pacific during the final years of World War II. The unit's missions, completely redacted. Jess leaned against the Jeep, shaking her head. "Do you realize what this means? We've got the only surviving vehicle from a unit the government pretends never existed." And then came the strangest discovery yet. Tucked under the rear bench seat, wrapped in more oilskin, was an old reel-to-reel audio tape. A label, faded but legible, read, "Project Iron Torch, Briefing, 1944. Carl didn't have the equipment to play it, but his friend at the local historical society did. We arranged to meet him the next morning. When the tape started, the sound was scratchy, voices muffled, but the words sent chills down my spine. "Prototype transport, must remain operational at all times. Classified munitions, do not deploy unless authorized. Coordinates confirmed. Extraction scheduled for August the 19th. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by a long stretch of static. Jess sat back, wide-eyed. They were moving something or someone. We spent the rest of the day cataloging every crate, every document, every piece of the Jeep. Jess contacted a private military collector she'd sold to before, someone who could discreetly appraise the whole lot. His estimate: if we could prove authenticity and avoid the wrong kind of attention, the Jeep and its contents could fetch anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 at auction. But that wrong kind of attention was a big problem, because later that week, I saw the same black sedan that had pulled up to Jess' house, parked across the street from the barn. And when I told her, she just smiled in that stubborn, Jess way. "They're not taking this Jeep from me, not without a fight."